Did Jagex ruin the Tombs of Amascut? A question quite a few people have been asking recently, and in my opinion, the answer is a resounding no. Absolutely not. But that has not stopped the onslaught of criticism, of controversy, of Reddit flame surrounding the release of this raid and the subsequent hotfixes and patches. That has all been inflammatory, to say the least. There are, in fact, so many changes that every time I finish this video, something new happens and I have to go back and rewrite or delete and re-record, but now that we are in calmer waters, I want to give a bit of an opinion piece about how TOA fits into the greater landscape of RuneScape, and hopefully strike a bit of a middle ground between both the piss bucket sweats and the Timmy Turner casuals, who seem to be locked in a never-ending war about almost nothing at this point. Real quick, I would like to thank HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. Doesn't matter what riffraff is going on in Raids 3, alright, everyone's gotta eat, which is why HelloFresh is here. Makes it easier, faster, no grocery shopping or meal planning, just wholesome, delicious meals delivered to your door. At the end of the day, it's incredibly convenient. There's no waste, the amount of time saved in planning and shopping is absolutely insane, and not to mention, it saves money, especially if you ordered food every day like I used to do. And the best part is that the meals taste really good. They have a huge selection for different dietary preferences, and they're healthy, which is massive for me because I'm currently in the process of trying to lose a few lbs. If that's one of your goals as well, then HelloFresh can help a bunch because you can choose meals based on whatever your nutritional needs might be. Seriously, give them a try. Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGTASTYSEPT16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 surprise gifts. Once you click, my description will live update to count up the purchases. Again, thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. So, let's rewind to the release of TOA. I think most people would agree that this is one of the best pieces of content in the game in general, probably the best since we got the Theater of Blood 4 years ago. And honestly, I will never have as much fun in RuneScape as I did on release day, sitting in Discord with like Bodhi, S-tier gamers, having a great time just figuring out the raid completely blind. It was a brand new RuneScape experience that I had never had before that. However, that doesn't last, right? Content is only new for a brief period. So, after a few days, things started to settle down, and people started asking questions about TOA. How deep is this content? How rewarding is this content? How complex is this content? You know, is this something like TOB or Chambers, where we're still finding emergent gameplay nearly 5 years later? Or is this something of a Nex, where once the polish of newness wore off, people realized that we were staring at a pile of dookie? Now, thank the lords above, I think most people would agree this content is good. At a basic fundamental level, this content is fun. However, that is where our first piece of controversy approaches. You see, as people started to farm this raid and purple started flying in, some drama almost immediately arose. Is this content too easy? Is this content too rewarding for the level of effort that people are putting in? And I think the ultimate question that is going to persist throughout all of the loot balancing changes, what is the purpose of TOA? What is the niche in RuneScape that it is supposed to fill, and does it achieve that? Now, from the very get-go, we were clued into the fact that TOA was going to be aimed at the grand majority of the player base, the everyman Joe, if you will. Now, newer players and the really top-end players certainly will receive some benefits, but the goal was to entice the largest number of players possible. And honestly, I think they did pretty well with that goal. Now, the plan to do that, the plan to satisfy the largest number of players possible, was by using the Invocation System, which is a new and innovative approach to difficulty scaling, and it's really like nothing we have ever seen before. Now, instead of the binary normal hard mode that we would get with pretty much all the other content, this essentially allowed for a stepless adjustment of difficulty all from level 0 to level 600. So this tells us a couple important things. Now, number one, again, that accessibility is key. Like I said, it's their main goal, because if players can decide how difficult they want to be, then with subsequent balanced rewards, everyone should leave happy, right? Jagex did not want to release another TOB, or something even harder, as that would really shut out a majority of the players who didn't have the skill, the time, or even the friends to attempt to engage with content like that. And of course, when we learned all of this about the difficulty and whatnot, a lot of top-end players did seem to be a little bit upset. And I understand it. I mean, we had been doing nothing but depression tobs for essentially 2 years at this point. However, even as a self-proclaimed piss bucket sweat, I think this was exactly the move that Jagex should have made. Now, I do think it's important for a game, especially in MMO, to have content of varying difficulties, all the way from the casual Timmy Turner to the 1%. However, let's not kid ourselves here, alright? The content from Jagex has slowed down in recent years. Like, we got Raids 1, we got Inferno, and we got Raids 2 in the span of a year and a half. They were able to add something as difficult as Inferno because there was a wealth of content for all the other players to explore. It then took 4 years for the next piece of content of that level being obviously Raids 3. So, if Jagex decided to make the most major release of the past 4 years isolate a majority of the player base, that's clearly a stupid decision. And I'm glad they didn't cater this update towards players like myself. Ultimately, I would love a new piece of content on the Inferno level or even greater, but what I want more than that is a healthy game community. Now, that was a long point, I know, but all of that goes to say, maybe this raid should be a little bit more rewarding for the average player. And it's not like we were stiffed on the technical aspect either. Expert mode raids are hard. They're very difficult. But that is exactly where this controversy really blooms. Pretty much every player felt that expert modes were just not worth it to run. They were fun, sure, but you could do 2 level 150 raids in the time that you could do 1 level 300, arguably with much less effort. Even if the loot from Expert was twice as good, the only real reason to farm it would be for fun, and that dwindles very quickly when you are not properly rewarded, monetarily speaking. So everyone quickly began giving their 2 cents on how to fix this issue. A lot of lower level players wanted to keep everything exactly the way it was, with good reason, right? Like, this is by far the most rewarding piece of content they have, and it's extremely fun. But on the other end, higher end players felt that it was pretty unfair, especially because extremely expensive drops and turbo late game best in slot items were entering the game at a rate that was far too fast from content that was far too easy to deserve that. And from a middle of the road perspective, I kind of have to agree, but what do we do to remedy that? Now, the extremes on either end were listen to the noobs, keep everything the same, or listen to the sweats and, delete all of the entry mode drops and lock the staff behind expert mode. I don't think either of those were the correct route. I'll get into what Jagex did do, but first consider my proposition. In my heart of hearts, I don't really think entry mode should give drops. However, the precedent has already been set. You can receive the Fang and the Ring. And at this point, it's just a little bit too late to take that away. So, make entry mode drops available, but make them rare. Maybe something like 1 out of 100, scaling to the number of players that are in the raid. This still incentivizes newer players to try the content, and honestly, 150 raids are genuinely so easy that, after doing a few entries, hopefully people will be enticed to actually give normals a shot. Also, side note, they should remove the possibility to get all the other drops because yes, you can get every single drop from entry mode, albeit pretty rare. And even though it is exceedingly rare, it just is slightly ludicrous in my mind that you can receive a multi-billion GP staff from content that I would say is about the difficulty of Vorkath. However, I don't think that the staff should be locked behind experts or anything like that. That just feels too gatekeepy to me. Instead, at 150, I think the totality of the drops should be unlocked. You can get everything, but the staff can be scaled back a little bit, maybe by half. And then at 300 plus experts, you can buff the rate of the staff back to what it was and reduce the weighting of the Fang and the Ring, which is kind of like what they did for hard mode Tob, where they reduced the rate of the Avernic Defender because there was too many coming in. I think that strikes a pretty solid middle ground and, still rewards newer players for attempting the content and incentivizes players to really push that raid level. But that's just my personal opinion. If you guys have any ideas on how loot should be handled, drop them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear them. So what did Jagex do? Well, there have been several rounds of balancing, but to my knowledge, they've only really changed the drop rates once. And to be honest, I think they fixed it the best they could without changing the core mechanics of how the loot system worked. All they did was reduce the base drop chance, so lower points is less drops, and then they increased the effect that raid level had on receiving a purple. So more points, more loot, basically. They said roughly that a 300 level expert now has 2.5 times the purple rate as a 150 normal, which I think is great. Sweet spot. Which is really good. It's not stiffing mid-game players, the drop rates are pretty close to the same for them, and once again the higher level players are incentivized to push the raid level. Entry mode does still have all the drops, yes, but with how easy normal modes are, and Jagex even said that normal mode was easier than they intended it to be, I hope people get the confidence to send some normals after they try out entry mode a few times. All in all, the loot changes were definitely desired, and I do think Jagex reached a good middle ground on them because I haven't seen anyone complaining on Twitter or Reddit. So I think we kind of knocked it out of the park. Now the second half of this video is going to be about the balancing changes that they made to the bosses and invocations, which, my god, incited some violence. And this, in my opinion, highlights one of the core problems with the raid in general. And that is the fact that the raid has so many moving parts, right? There's not just boss mechanics, but there's invocations that change mechanics, lengthen mechanics, bring new mechanics, and scaling that spans orders of magnitude with all these different variables. This is fundamentally extremely hard to balance. The TLDR of the changes that they made at this point are they made all of the bosses a little bit more difficult because, like I said earlier, they did say that normal mode was just a little bit easier than they wanted it to be, and they also changed up the mid-game supplies, which we'll get into. Now, the only things worth talking about are those supply changes and the changes to the Warden, which are the biggest and harshest changes. Now, for supplies. The big deal at the time was the nerf to Ambrosia, or semi-nerf, I guess, which they then almost immediately reverted. They made it into a 1-dose potion, which, my opinion on that is that it actually should be a 1-dose potion. I think Ambrosia is a little bit too powerful, and if you have 4 doses of Ambrosia, like sometimes you'll get at the end of a raid, like that's too many supplies. Like you don't need to worry at all. And they also moved Ambrosia to the life section of the friendly ghost. Now, I honestly understand moving it because it does make sense. Thematically, it is a healing item. However, I don't really think it changed that much, and if anything, it just made the raid slightly easier. What Jagex said they wanted to do was prevent the meta from going stale, because when you got the mid-raid supplies, when the raid was first released, everyone would just pick power twice in a row because of the sweet, delicious Ambrosia. And they needed salts and stuff and adrenaline. Now, in my opinion, that was somewhat of a reward for proper supply management because you could just go into Wardens if you had enough brews and restores left over from the raid. Yeah, but I'm not too miffed about it. However, it just didn't change the core of the meta at all. Players just pick power because they need salts and adrenaline, and then they pick life because they want Ambrosia. It's still the same two things over and over again. Or sometimes you pick chaos. Do you? Do you pick chaos? Are we having fun? We're still picking the same two things over and over again, right? Just now we have less adrenaline and more healing. Which, speaking on adrenaline, also had some changes that I didn't love, but again, were reverted while I was writing this. And you know, right now this point is not actually about adrenaline itself. It's about the fact that Jagex is going extremely cowboy cavalier with the rate and amount of changes they're making to this raid. I am aligned with the belief that it is better to change things sooner rather than later, because it does suck spending 6 months developing a meta and building all the muscle memory and just having that kind of torn away from you, sure. But there is a limit to that. I think we need to be a little bit more deliberate with these changes, change 1 or 2 things at a time, let them sit for a couple weeks, and then adjust from there. Right now, it just seems like we're adjusting too many factors too quickly, and it makes it difficult to discern what is having an effect on what. Now, you'll notice I did mention Wardens Phase 2. Now, the Wardens fight was the one that people were the most mad about, namely the core changes. Now, on Phase 2 of Wardens, the objective is to bring down the boss to 0 health while you're dealing with all the mechanics, at which point a little core pops out of its body. And the goal is to damage this core. Every point of damage you do is multiplied by 5, and your melee weapon will always max hit. So what do people do? Everyone started bringing dragon daggers and popping their adrenaline and just specking the shit out of this thing. It was super fun. Now, Jagex thought that the time between core phases should be longer, so when you're dealing with the actual mechanics. So they did two things. Number one, they raised the health of the Wardens in certain scales, and number two, they made the amount of time you can attack the core much shorter. So the 2-down strats that people were running turned into 4 downs, and it became extremely tedious, and it was a massive supply sink, because there's a lot of unavoidable damage going down on phase 1 and 2 of Wardens. Now, Reddit exploded about this, right? They said Jagex had ruined TOA. And even high-level players were like, yeah, this is a bit much. We don't like this either. Now, I think simply lengthening a fight makes it kind of artificially difficult. You're not really adding anything new to overcome. However, I do think that there is a balance that has to be struck with the length of the fight because you do have to prove your mastery over the mechanics. But where that line lays, I guess, is kind of a matter of opinion. I would have liked to see the phase 2 health just be increased. That's it. That's really all you had to do. If you wanted us to deal with phase 2 longer, just make us deal with phase 2 longer. Keep the core the same. Once again, Jagex did strike a decent compromise, all things considered. The first core down remained short, and then the second core phase was actually a good bit longer, which allowed a team with proper planning to still get the 2 downs. Overall, pretty fine, right? And the third and subsequent phases were just super long, so you didn't get trapped in phase 2. Overall, pretty fine, in my opinion. As for phase 3, they made the T-bow less effective, and they raised the health a little bit on phase 3. But at the same time, they gave a ludicrous buff to Tumikin's Shadow. So the whole fight is essentially just nerfed for rich people and then buffed for everyone who can't afford a Shadow and max mage. However, I have both, so I don't really care. Overall, I think Jagex has handled Raids 3 not perfectly, but with a lot of grace, which is refreshing. Besides the servers being nearly unbearable, which could be an entire video in its own, the launch had no issues. You cannot possibly argue that they haven't been on top of balancing changes because we get like 4 patches a week. And when the community has made their voices heard, Jagex listens, all right? They're willing to accept criticism, they're willing to accept feedback, which I think is really nice to see from a developer. And it also gives me high hopes for the future of this raid, because I'm sure we are not done seeing changes. So, what do you guys think? Do you like this raid? Do you think the changes have been beneficial? Is there anything you would like to see added, removed? Leave a comment down below, and I will try to interact with as many of them as I possibly can. Stay tasty.